Kindness at its core is a beautiful trait. It reflects empathy, understanding, and a willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. It has the power to build bridges, mend relationships, and foster a sense of connection that few other qualities can match. However, the very essence of kindness can sometimes be misunderstood or exploited when it is not balanced with boundaries. People who are inherently kind often face a peculiar dilemma. They give, not realizing that their endless generosity may lead others to take them for granted. This misunderstanding of kindness stems from the absence of clearly defined limits. Without boundaries, even the purest kindness can be perceived as weakness. When you consistently place the needs of others before your own, it can create a pattern where people come to expect your generosity as a given rather than appreciating it as a gift. Over time, the line between kindness and obligation becomes blurred. People start to assume that you will always be available, always willing to sacrifice your own well-being for theirs. What was once an admirable quality becomes something they feel entitled to. The absence of boundaries means there's no point where you say, "This is enough," or "I cannot accommodate this." Instead, you become a well that others believe they can draw from endlessly. This dynamic doesn't arise out of malice on the part of others, but rather from human nature. When something is freely given without restriction, its value is often diminished in the eyes of the recipient. Consider how we value things in our lives. We cherish what is rare, what takes effort to obtain, or what we know has limits. But when something is always available, it loses its perceived worth. The same applies to kindness. When you give endlessly, people begin to see it as something they don't need to work for, something they don't need to respect. It becomes an expectation rather than a privilege. Moreover, a lack of boundaries can send unintended messages about your own self-respect. When you consistently prioritize others over yourself, it might seem to them as though you don't value your own time, energy, or emotional well-being. People take cues from how you treat yourself. If you are constantly bending over backward to accommodate others, they might interpret it as an indication that your needs and feelings are secondary even to you. This perception can erode the respect they have for you, not because they are inherently disrespectful, but because you haven't established the boundaries that demand respect. Kindness without boundaries also leads to an imbalance in relationships. Whether it's a friendship, a romantic partnership, or a professional connection, every relationship requires a sense of mutual respect and reciprocity to thrive. When one person is consistently giving and the other is consistently taking, the dynamic becomes lopsided. The giver, despite their best intentions, begins to feel drained, unappreciated, and eventually resentful. On the other hand, the taker becomes accustomed to this one-sided arrangement, often without realizing the toll it's taking on the other person. This imbalance not only affects the quality of the relationship, but also reinforces the cycle of disrespect. Another critical aspect to consider is that when you are overly kind without setting boundaries, you inadvertently attract people who are more likely to take advantage of you. Not everyone has the emotional maturity or integrity to recognize and respect kindness. Some people see it as an opportunity to exploit. They gravitate toward those who they perceive as easy to manipulate or overly accommodating. In such cases, the very kindness that makes you special becomes the reason you are taken for granted or disrespected. Kindness without boundaries also leads to burnout. When you are constantly giving, it takes a toll on your emotional, physical, and mental well-being. You may feel obligated to say yes to every request, to be there for everyone at all times, and to put your own needs last. This self-sacrifice, while noble in intention, is unsustainable. Over time, the constant giving can leave you feeling exhausted, unfulfilled, and even resentful. The irony is that in your effort to be kind and helpful, you may end up feeling depleted and unappreciated. When others witness this self-sacrifice, it can have unintended consequences on their perception of you. They might think you don't know how to assert yourself or that you lack the strength to stand up for your own needs. This perception, whether accurate or not, diminishes their respect for you. They might even push boundaries further, testing how much you are willing to tolerate. The more you give in, the less they value your kindness, and the more they come to see it as a given rather than a choice. It's important to recognize that boundaries are not barriers to kindness. They are the framework that gives kindness its true value. Boundaries protect both you and the people around you. They ensure that your kindness is rooted in strength rather than obligation. Boundaries allow you to give generously without losing yourself in the process. They communicate that your time, energy, and well-being are valuable, and that while you are willing to give, it will not come at the expense of your own needs and dignity. When kindness is given freely and abundantly, it is often seen as a positive and admirable trait, but there is an unfortunate reality that many kind-hearted individuals face. The world can misinterpret kindness as weakness. This misinterpretation does not stem from the inherent value of kindness itself, but rather from how it is perceived in a society that often equates assertiveness with strength. When people encounter someone who is consistently kind without regard to personal boundaries or self-preservation, they may begin to associate that kindness with a lack of self-confidence or an inability to stand firm. The perception of weakness arises from the way kindness can sometimes manifest. People who are naturally kind often avoid conflict, go out of their way to please others, and put others' needs above their own. While these actions are done with the best intentions, they can inadvertently project an image of someone who is overly accommodating or unwilling to assert themselves. In relationships, whether personal or professional, this can lead to an imbalance of power. The kind individual becomes seen as someone who will always bend, always agree, and always put their own desires aside for the sake of harmony. This dynamic is especially apparent when kindness is met with selfishness or entitlement. Not everyone will recognize or appreciate genuine kindness. Instead, some may see it as an opportunity to exploit. They may test boundaries, push limits, and see how far they can go without being challenged. The more kindness is met with compliance, the more they may come to view it as a lack of strength rather than a deliberate choice. Over time, this can erode the respect they have for the kind person, not because kindness is inherently unworthy of respect, but because it is perceived as a passive trait. Another factor contributing to this perception of weakness is the cultural and societal emphasis on assertiveness and dominance. From a young age, people are often taught to admire those who are strong, decisive, and unyielding. These qualities are associated with leadership and power, whereas kindness is sometimes unfairly relegated to the realm of naivety or passivity. When someone embodies kindness without pairing it with assertiveness, they may struggle to be taken seriously in environments where strength is equated with toughness. This cultural bias further reinforces the idea that kindness, when not tempered with firmness, is a liability rather than an asset. In interpersonal relationships, this perception of weakness can lead to significant challenges. The kind individual may find themselves in situations where their needs and feelings are overlooked because others assume they will always be accommodating. For example, in a workplace setting, a kind employee who consistently takes on extra work without complaint may be seen as someone who can be relied upon to handle burdens that others avoid. While this may initially seem like a compliment to their work ethic, it can quickly turn into exploitation. Their kindness becomes a reason to pile on more responsibilities without recognition or compensation, under the assumption that they won't push back. In romantic relationships, the misinterpretation of kindness can create even deeper emotional wounds. A kind partner who always prioritizes their significant other's happiness may inadvertently set a precedent where their own needs are ignored. Over time, this can create a dynamic where their kindness is no longer appreciated but expected. Their gestures of love and care, which should be cherished, become routine and taken for granted. Worse, the other person may start to view their kindness as a lack of self-respect or independence, leading to a loss of attraction or admiration. Kindness, when perceived as weakness, also opens the door to manipulation. Those with less honorable intentions may use a kind person's desire to avoid conflict or make others happy as a tool to get what they want. They may play on the kind person's emotions, guilt them into actions they wouldn't normally agree to, or take advantage of their reluctance to say no. This manipulation further cements the perception that kindness equates to a lack of strength or discernment, making it even harder for the kind individual to assert themselves later on. One of the most insidious aspects of this perception is how it affects the self-esteem of the kind person. When their kindness is consistently misunderstood or exploited, they may begin to doubt their own worth. They may question whether their kindness is a flaw or whether they need to change who they are to be respected. This internal struggle can lead to feelings of inadequacy, frustration, and resentment, even though the problem lies not in their kindness but in how it is being perceived and treated by others. The cycle is perpetuated by the kind person's reluctance to challenge these perceptions. Out of a fear of being seen as rude, selfish, or confrontational, they may continue to act in ways that reinforce the idea of kindness as weakness. They may avoid standing up for themselves, hesitate to set boundaries, and downplay their own needs, all in an effort to maintain their image as a kind and giving individual. Ironically, this effort to preserve their kindness only deepens the perception of weakness, creating a loop that is difficult to break. The reality is that kindness, when combined with strength and self-respect, is one of the most powerful traits a person can possess. It has the ability to inspire, uplift, and transform. But when kindness is presented without the balance of assertiveness, it becomes vulnerable to misinterpretation. Those who are naturally kind must recognize that their kindness does not diminish their strength, but must be paired with a clear sense of self-worth to be truly respected. Without this balance, the very quality that makes them exceptional can be seen as a vulnerability. Kindness is a powerful force that has the potential to uplift, heal, and transform relationships. However, when it is extended without discretion, it can create unintended consequences. Being overly kind to everyone, regardless of their character or intentions, can lead to scenarios where kindness is not only unappreciated but also exploited. The issue lies not with kindness itself, which is inherently good, but with the lack of discernment in deciding who deserves your generosity and compassion. In a world where not everyone acts with integrity, offering kindness indiscriminately can become a double-edged sword, exposing you to harm or disrespect. One of the primary challenges of being overly kind to everyone is the assumption that all individuals share the same values or principles. This assumption leads to a blind spot where the kind-hearted individual fails to recognize those who might misuse their generosity. Not everyone has honorable intentions, and some people see kindness as an opportunity rather than a virtue. These individuals are quick to exploit the kindness of others for their own gain, often without any regard for the impact on the giver. Whether it's through manipulation, deceit, or selfishness, they use kindness as a means to an end, leaving the giver feeling drained, betrayed, or disrespected. Over time, this dynamic can create a pattern where the overly kind individual attracts people who are more interested in taking than giving. These relationships become one-sided, with the kind person continuously giving while the other party contributes little to nothing in return. This imbalance is not always immediately apparent, as the kind person may initially feel fulfilled by their role as a giver. However, as the pattern continues, the emotional toll becomes evident. The kind individual may start to feel unappreciated, undervalued, and even resentful, questioning why their kindness is met with exploitation rather than gratitude. Being overly kind to everyone also sends unintended messages about your boundaries and self-worth. When you consistently prioritize others' needs over your own, it can signal to others that your time, energy, and resources are limitless. This perception makes it easier for people to take you for granted. They may assume that you will always be there to support them, no matter how much they demand or how little they reciprocate. Over time, this assumption erodes the respect they have for you, as they begin to see your kindness as an obligation rather than a gift. Another critical aspect of this dynamic is the way it impacts the giver's sense of identity and self-esteem. When kindness is not reciprocated or appreciated, it can lead to feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. The overly kind individual may start to question whether their kindness is a weakness or whether they are being too naive. These internal doubts can create a sense of disconnection between their actions and their self-worth, making it difficult to maintain a positive sense of identity. This emotional struggle is compounded by the lack of boundaries, as the giver feels trapped in a cycle of overextension and disappointment. The absence of discernment in extending kindness also diminishes its impact. When kindness is given indiscriminately, it loses its value in the eyes of others. People begin to expect it rather than appreciate it, and its transformative power is diluted. Consider the analogy of a rare gift versus an everyday item. A rare gift is cherished and treasured because of its uniqueness, whereas an everyday item is often overlooked because it is readily available. Kindness works in much the same way. When it is given thoughtfully and selectively, it holds immense value. But when it is offered without consideration, it risks being taken for granted or ignored. Furthermore, being overly kind to everyone can lead to burnout and exhaustion. The emotional and physical toll of constantly giving without receiving can leave the kind individual feeling depleted and overwhelmed. This burnout is not just a result of the act of giving, but also the emotional weight of feeling unappreciated or taken advantage of. The lack of reciprocity creates an imbalance that is unsustainable, leading to feelings of resentment and frustration. Over time, this emotional exhaustion can affect not only the giver's relationships, but also their overall well-being and mental health. In some cases, being overly kind to everyone can also hinder personal growth and self-improvement. When you spend all your energy focusing on others, you have little left to invest in yourself. This self-neglect can prevent you from pursuing your own goals, dreams, and aspirations. It can also create a sense of stagnation as you become so consumed by the needs of others that you lose sight of your own potential. This sacrifice, while noble in intention, ultimately limits your ability to grow and thrive as an individual. Additionally, the habit of being overly kind to everyone can create a ripple effect in your relationships. It sets a precedent that others come to expect, making it difficult to establish boundaries later on. When you try to assert yourself or prioritize your own needs, it may come as a shock to those who have grown accustomed to your limitless generosity. This adjustment can lead to conflict, misunderstandings, and even strained relationships as others struggle to adapt to the new dynamic. It's essential to recognize that kindness is most effective when it is balanced with discernment and boundaries. Offering kindness selectively does not diminish its value, but rather enhances it, ensuring that it is given to those who truly appreciate and respect it. This approach not only protects the giver from exploitation, but also preserves the integrity and power of their kindness, allowing it to create meaningful and positive change in the lives of others. Respect is a cornerstone of every meaningful relationship, whether personal or professional. It is what ensures mutual understanding, cooperation, and trust between individuals. However, when kindness is expressed without setting clear boundaries, it often has the unintended effect of diminishing the respect others have for you. This is not because kindness itself is unworthy, but because an absence of limits can blur the lines between generosity and self-neglect. When others observe that you continuously accommodate their demands or overlook their transgressions without standing up for yourself, they may subconsciously devalue the very kindness you extend. One of the fundamental ways this dynamic unfolds is through a lack of accountability. When someone realizes they can take advantage of your kindness without facing consequences, they begin to test the boundaries even further. For example, they might make unreasonable requests or disregard your feelings, knowing you will likely acquiesce to keep the peace. Over time, this pattern erodes the foundation of mutual respect in the relationship. They may start to view you as someone who prioritizes their needs above your own to such an extent that your own needs appear irrelevant. This perception can lead to a dangerous imbalance of power, where one person feels entitled to take and the other feels obligated to give. This erosion of respect is not always overt. Often it occurs gradually as the other person adjusts to the dynamic you've unintentionally created. Small acts of kindness, such as always being available, forgiving too quickly, or avoiding confrontation, can seem inconsequential at first. However, these repeated actions can establish a precedent where your kindness is expected rather than valued. When kindness becomes an expectation, its impact diminishes, and the respect that should accompany it begins to fade. Instead of being seen as a strength, your kindness is perceived as a default behavior that requires no acknowledgement or appreciation. Another factor contributing to this loss of respect is the perception of self-worth. People often gauge how much to respect someone based on how that individual respects themselves. When you consistently put others' needs above your own, you may unintentionally signal that you don't value your own time, energy, or well-being. This lack of self-prioritization can be misinterpreted as a lack of confidence or self-respect, leading others to question your authority or judgment. In professional settings, this can manifest as colleagues or superiors overlooking your contributions or taking your efforts for granted. In personal relationships, it can lead to a lack of appreciation for the care and support you provide. In addition to self-perception, the way you handle conflict plays a significant role in how others respect you. Kind-hearted individuals often avoid conflict out of a desire to maintain harmony. While this approach may seem noble, it can backfire when others see it as an inability to stand firm. If you never assert yourself or push back when your boundaries are crossed, it creates an impression that you are willing to accept any behavior, no matter how disrespectful or unfair. Over time, this can embolden others to act in ways they wouldn't dare with someone who is more assertive. The lack of consequences for their actions reinforces their belief that your kindness equates to passivity, further diminishing their respect for you. Moreover, constantly accommodating others without regard for your own needs can create a perception of inequality in relationships. People tend to value what they have to work for or earn. When kindness is given freely and without any expectations in return, it may not be seen as a gift, but rather as an obligation or a given. This lack of reciprocity can make the relationship feel one-sided, where your kindness is met with indifference rather than appreciation. The imbalance undermines the respect that should come from mutual effort and shared values, leaving you feeling unappreciated and undervalued. There is also a psychological element at play. Human nature often responds to scarcity with value and abundance with complacency. When your kindness is abundant and unreserved, it can become easy to overlook its significance. People may start to take your efforts for granted simply because they become a constant in their lives. The more they come to expect your kindness, the less they feel the need to acknowledge or respect it. This phenomenon is not a reflection of the quality of your kindness, but of how human behavior tends to respond to what is perceived as readily available. The lack of boundaries that accompanies unchecked kindness can also lead to resentment, both from you and from others. While it may seem counterintuitive, the very people who benefit from your kindness may start to resent you for being too nice. This resentment stems from a psychological discomfort with imbalances in relationships. When someone feels they are constantly receiving without giving, it can create feelings of guilt or unease. Instead of addressing these feelings, they may project them onto you, rationalizing that your kindness is excessive or unwarranted. This projection further erodes respect, as they begin to view your kindness not as a virtue but as a flaw. Lastly, the way you respond to mistreatment or disrespect has a profound impact on how others perceive you. If you continue to show kindness to those who disrespect you, it can send the message that you condone their behavior. This lack of reaction may be interpreted as weakness or a lack of self-respect, further diminishing the respect they have for you. People are less likely to value someone who doesn't stand up for themselves, as it creates an impression that you are willing to accept less than you deserve. When kindness is extended without discernment, it can often lead to the unintentional blurring of lines between compassion and enabling harmful behaviors. People who take advantage of kindness tend to push boundaries, testing how much they can get away with before encountering resistance. This dynamic places the kind-hearted individual in a precarious position where their generosity, intended to foster goodwill, instead becomes a tool for manipulation. Over time, this cycle not only exhausts the giver but also emboldens those who exploit their kindness, reinforcing a pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to break. One of the most significant consequences of not setting boundaries is the development of a sense of entitlement in those who consistently benefit from your kindness. They begin to expect your assistance, time, or resources as if they are owed to them rather than graciously offered. This entitlement often manifests in subtle ways. At first, perhaps they start asking for small favors more frequently or assume you will always accommodate their needs. Gradually, these expectations grow larger and more intrusive, leaving you feeling overwhelmed and taken advantage of. The problem is compounded when you consistently comply, as each instance of acquiescence reinforces their belief that your kindness is limitless. When kindness is extended without discernment, it can often lead to the unintentional blurring of lines between compassion and enabling harmful behaviors. People who take advantage of kindness tend to push boundaries, testing how much they can get away with before encountering resistance. This dynamic places the kind-hearted individual in a precarious position where their generosity, intended to foster goodwill, instead becomes a tool for manipulation. Over time, this cycle not only exhausts the giver but also emboldens those who exploit their kindness, reinforcing a pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to break. One of the most significant consequences of not setting boundaries is the development of a sense of entitlement in those who consistently benefit from your kindness. They begin to expect your assistance, time, or resources as if they are owed to them, rather than graciously offered. This entitlement often manifests in subtle ways. At first, perhaps they start asking for small favors more frequently or assume you will always accommodate their needs. Gradually, these expectations grow larger and more intrusive, leaving you feeling overwhelmed and taken advantage of. The problem is compounded when you consistently comply, as each instance of acquiescence reinforces their belief that your kindness is limitless. This lack of boundaries can also create a dependency in those who rely on your kindness. While helping others is undoubtedly a positive and admirable trait, doing so without limitations can prevent people from learning to solve their problems or take responsibility for their actions. For instance, if someone repeatedly comes to you for financial assistance or emotional support without making an effort to address the root causes of their struggles, your kindness may inadvertently enable their lack of accountability. This dependency not only drains your energy and resources, but also stifles the personal growth and development of the individual you are trying to help. Moreover, when people exploit your kindness, it can lead to feelings of resentment and frustration on your part. You may start to feel that your efforts are unappreciated or that you are being used, which can create internal conflict. These emotions often go unexpressed, as kind-hearted individuals tend to avoid confrontation, fearing it might damage the relationship. However, suppressing these feelings can lead to emotional exhaustion and a sense of being undervalued. Over time, this emotional toll can erode your sense of self-worth, leaving you questioning whether your kindness is a strength or a liability. The impact of unguarded kindness is not limited to individual relationships. It can also extend to social and professional settings. In the workplace, for example, consistently taking on extra tasks or covering for others without asserting your own needs can lead to being overburdened and underappreciated. Colleagues may start to view you as someone who is always available to pick up the slack, which can result in an unfair distribution of responsibilities. This dynamic not only affects your productivity and job satisfaction, but can also create a perception that you lack the confidence or assertiveness to advocate for yourself, further diminishing your standing among peers. In personal relationships, the exploitation of kindness can manifest in more intimate and emotionally charged ways. A partner, friend, or family member who takes advantage of your generosity may start to disregard your boundaries or prioritize their needs over yours. This imbalance can strain the relationship, as one person consistently gives while the other takes without reciprocation. The kind-hearted individual may feel compelled to continue giving, hoping to maintain harmony or avoid conflict, but this approach often leads to a cycle of unmet expectations and growing resentment. Additionally, when kindness is exploited, it can have a ripple effect on other aspects of your life. The time, energy, and resources you devote to those who take advantage of you may leave little room for self-care or personal pursuits. This neglect can hinder your ability to achieve your own goals, maintain your well-being, or nurture relationships with people who genuinely value and respect your kindness. The imbalance created by unguarded generosity not only depletes your emotional reserves, but also limits your capacity to invest in areas of your life that truly matter. It is also worth noting that when kindness is given without discernment, it can attract individuals who thrive on manipulation and control. These people are often skilled at identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities, and they see unchecked kindness as an opportunity to assert dominance. They may use guilt, flattery, or other tactics to manipulate you into meeting their needs, all while feigning gratitude or affection. Over time, this manipulation can erode your sense of autonomy and make it increasingly difficult to establish boundaries, as the fear of conflict or rejection keeps you trapped in the cycle. The psychological impact of being taken advantage of should not be underestimated. When your kindness is consistently exploited, it can lead to feelings of self-doubt and a diminished sense of self-worth. You may start to question your judgment or wonder why others fail to appreciate your efforts. These internal struggles can create a negative feedback loop, where the more you give without receiving respect or appreciation, the more disheartened you become. This emotional toll can have far-reaching consequences, affecting your mental health, relationships, and overall quality of life. Finally, it is important to recognize that allowing your kindness to be exploited does not only harm you, but also those who benefit from it. By failing to set boundaries, you may inadvertently enable unhealthy behaviors or foster a sense of entitlement that prevents others from growing or taking responsibility for their actions. True kindness involves not only generosity but also wisdom and discernment, ensuring that your efforts uplift and empower others rather than creating dependency or perpetuating harmful dynamics. When kindness is expressed without self-awareness, it often becomes a silent invitation for others to ignore, overlook, or even trample your needs and feelings. This dynamic is rooted in the subtle ways people perceive and respond to behaviors that prioritize others over oneself. While acts of kindness are inherently virtuous, when they are consistently one-sided and lack an element of self-respect, they create an imbalance that shifts the dynamics of a relationship. Over time, this imbalance fosters an environment where your voice, preferences, and well-being are undervalued or even dismissed entirely. One of the primary ways this happens is through the absence of reciprocation. In healthy relationships, kindness should flow in both directions, creating a balance where both parties feel seen, heard, and valued. However, when one person gives endlessly without expressing their own needs or expecting anything in return, it disrupts this equilibrium. Those on the receiving end may come to see your kindness as a given rather than a choice. They may assume that your needs are minimal or that you derive satisfaction solely from giving. This perception diminishes the importance of your own emotional and physical well-being, relegating it to the background of the relationship. The lack of acknowledgement or validation for your kindness can also stem from the way people tend to prioritize their own concerns. Human nature often inclines people to focus on what directly impacts them, which means that acts of kindness, especially those that come easily or without resistance, can fade into the background. Over time, the consistent absence of recognition can make you feel invisible or as though your efforts are not appreciated. This lack of validation isn't always intentional. It can be the result of others becoming accustomed to the comfort and convenience your kindness provides, to the point where they no longer consciously register it as extraordinary or deserving of acknowledgement. Another significant factor is the fear of rejection or conflict, which often accompanies unguarded kindness. Many kind-hearted individuals avoid voicing their needs or concerns because they fear being seen as selfish or ungrateful. They worry that setting boundaries or asking for reciprocation might disrupt the harmony of the relationship or alienate the other person. As a result, they remain silent, suppressing their feelings and desires to maintain peace. This silence, however, is often misinterpreted as consent or contentment. Others may assume that you have no unmet needs or that you are perfectly satisfied with the current dynamic, which further perpetuates the cycle of invisibility and undervaluation. The invisibility of your needs is also amplified by the way societal norms often frame kindness. Kindness is frequently celebrated as a selfless virtue, one that requires putting others before oneself. While this perspective underscores the importance of compassion, it can also create unrealistic expectations that kindness must come at the expense of self-care. When you consistently prioritize others to align with this ideal, you may inadvertently contribute to the perception that your own needs are secondary or even irrelevant. This dynamic can be particularly pronounced in caregiving roles, whether in family, friendships, or professional settings, where the expectation to give unconditionally is deeply ingrained. In addition, the invisibility of your needs is often reinforced by your own internal dialogue. Many people who are naturally kind-hearted struggle with feelings of guilt or shame when they consider prioritizing themselves. They may convince themselves that their needs are less important or that asking for support would burden others. This mindset not only prevents them from advocating for themselves, but also sends a message to others that their needs can be safely ignored. Over time, this internal narrative becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, as the lack of external validation reinforces the belief that their needs truly are less significant. The invisibility of your kindness also stems from the perception of abundance. People often place higher value on what they perceive as scarce or difficult to obtain. When kindness is given freely and abundantly, it can lose its perceived value in the eyes of others. Instead of being viewed as a precious and deliberate act, it may be taken for granted as though it is an unlimited resource requiring no effort or appreciation. This perception diminishes the impact of your kindness and contributes to the erosion of its visibility and significance. Another layer to this dynamic is the emotional exhaustion that comes from continually prioritizing others without receiving reciprocal care. Over time, the constant effort to meet others' needs without acknowledgement can leave you feeling depleted and unfulfilled. This emotional toll can make it even harder to assert yourself or advocate for your own well-being, as the energy required to do so feels insurmountable. The cycle of giving without receiving not only affects your emotional health, but also deepens the invisibility of your needs, as the depletion often goes unnoticed or unaddressed by those around you. The invisibility of your needs is further exacerbated by the reluctance of others to question or disrupt the status quo. When a relationship is built on the assumption that you will always be the giver, there is little incentive for others to challenge this dynamic. They may feel comfortable within the existing framework and see no reason to alter their behavior. This complacency can make it even more challenging for you to express your needs or shift the dynamics of the relationship, as doing so requires overcoming both internal resistance and external inertia. Finally, the invisibility of your needs can have long-term consequences for your sense of self-worth. When your kindness goes unacknowledged or is taken for granted, it can lead to feelings of resentment, frustration, and self-doubt. You may start to question whether your efforts are meaningful or whether you are valued at all. These feelings can create a negative feedback loop, where the more invisible your needs feel, the less likely you are to express them, perpetuating the cycle of invisibility and undervaluation. When kindness is offered without discernment, it can create an imbalance in the dynamics of relationships, leading to a loss of respect from others. At its core, respect is built upon mutual appreciation and understanding. However, when kindness is extended indiscriminately, it can inadvertently undermine the perception of your strength and self-worth. This is not because kindness is inherently weak, but because in the absence of boundaries and assertiveness, it may be misinterpreted as a lack of personal standards or self-respect. In relationships, whether personal or professional, people often test the boundaries of what is acceptable. These tests are not always conscious or malicious. They are a natural part of human interaction as individuals seek to understand the limits and expectations within a relationship. When kindness is repeatedly given without consideration for your own needs or limits, it can signal to others that you are willing to tolerate behavior that might not align with your values or preferences. Over time, this can lead to a situation where others feel free to disregard your opinions, feelings, or contributions, believing that there will be no consequence or pushback. This erosion of respect often begins subtly. Perhaps you consistently agree to tasks or favors even when they inconvenience you, or you avoid conflict by conceding to others' demands. These actions, while seemingly small, create a pattern that others begin to recognize. They may start to see your kindness not as a strength, but as a convenience they can exploit. The more this pattern is reinforced, the more likely it is that your acts of kindness will be taken for granted rather than appreciated. Instead of earning respect, your kindness becomes a tool for others to manipulate or use to their advantage. The loss of respect is further compounded by the lack of reciprocity in such relationships. Respect is a two-way street built on mutual recognition of each other's value and contributions. When you consistently give without receiving acknowledgement or effort in return, it disrupts this balance. Others may start to assume that you are content with this one-sided dynamic, or worse, that you do not expect or deserve better treatment. This assumption further diminishes their respect for you, as they perceive your kindness as a sign of weakness or desperation rather than a conscious choice. Another key factor is the way people interpret strength and assertiveness in others. Society often equates strength with the ability to say no, set boundaries, and advocate for oneself. When kindness is offered unconditionally without the occasional assertion of boundaries, it can be seen as a lack of strength or self-assurance. People may begin to view you as someone who can be easily influenced or taken advantage of rather than someone who commands respect. This perception not only affects how others treat you, but also how they perceive your value in the relationship. Kindness without discernment can also create an environment where others feel entitled to your time, energy, and resources. When you consistently prioritize others over yourself, it sets a precedent that your needs and boundaries are secondary. This sense of entitlement can lead to situations where others make unreasonable demands or take liberties they would not consider with someone they respect. Over time, this entitlement erodes the foundation of mutual respect, as others come to see your kindness as an obligation rather than a gift. The role of self-perception in this dynamic cannot be overstated. When you prioritize kindness over self-respect, it often stems from an internal belief that your value is tied to how much you give to others. This belief can lead to behaviors that inadvertently reinforce the perception that you do not value yourself enough to set limits or advocate for your own needs. Others pick up on these cues consciously or unconsciously and adjust their behavior accordingly. If you do not appear to respect yourself, it becomes increasingly difficult for others to respect you in return. The loss of respect associated with unguarded kindness is also exacerbated by societal norms and expectations. While kindness is universally celebrated as a virtue, it is often misunderstood in the context of relationships and power dynamics. People tend to associate respect with those who are perceived as confident, assertive, and willing to stand their ground. When kindness is expressed without these attributes, it can be misconstrued as passivity or a lack of self-respect. This misunderstanding further diminishes the respect others have for you, as they fail to see the strength that underpins genuine kindness. In addition, the loss of respect often manifests in subtle ways, making it difficult to recognize and address. Others may begin to interrupt you more frequently, dismiss your ideas, or fail to include you in important decisions. These behaviors may not seem significant in isolation, but collectively they signal a shift in how you are perceived within the relationship. Over time, these small acts of disrespect can erode your confidence and sense of self-worth, making it even harder to assert yourself and reclaim the respect you deserve. This cycle of diminishing respect is not easily broken, as it often requires a fundamental shift in how you approach kindness and relationships. It involves recognizing the importance of balance and setting boundaries that protect your well-being without compromising your values. This shift is not about becoming less kind, but about ensuring that your kindness is rooted in self-respect and self-awareness. By doing so, you can create relationships that are built on mutual respect and appreciation, rather than one-sided expectations. Ultimately, the respect others have for you is deeply connected to the way you respect yourself. When kindness is offered from a place of strength and self-assurance, it commands respect and admiration. However, when it is given without consideration for your own needs or boundaries, it can lead to a loss of respect that diminishes the value of your kindness and undermines the foundation of your relationships. This dynamic highlights the importance of balancing kindness with self-respect to foster relationships that are both meaningful and reciprocal.